Welcome to Law Subscribed. This is your dedicated news source for all things subscriptions in the law. My name is Matthew Kerbis. I'm the subscription attorney, and I believe subscriptions can help bridge the access to justice gap and incentivize attorneys to modernize and scale their practice like never before. On this show, I interview lawyers ditching the billable hour and experts who can help attorneys move beyond billing time. Thanks to my sponsors, 650 and Gavel. Links to both in the show notes. More on them later, and use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED when signing up. You get 10% off, and it supports the show. The best way to support the show is to share it with someone you know. This podcast is for educational and entertainment purposes only, and nothing said is legal, ethical, or financial advice. Without further delay, here's the episode. I'm thrilled to have with me today, I think, the first person who has the title evangelist on the podcast, or is an evangelist, we shall say, Colin Levy. Thank you for joining the Law Subscribe podcast. So just in case you are this, at least for me on LinkedIn, this influencer in the legal tech space. So I think my audience will have probably heard of you, but just in case they haven't read any of your stuff, give yourself a little introduction.
Sure. So I have been a lawyer for over 12 years at this point. I lost track of the years at this point, with a focus on technology and working in-house as a corporate lawyer. And over the last 7 or 8 years, I've really have focused my time on the intersection of law and tech and how technology is impacting both the practice and business of law. And that originated as me having conversations with others about their work, whether it was creating a tool, teaching students, some combination of both. And eventually that turned into me posting a lot on LinkedIn and on Twitter/X. And then perhaps most recently turned into the book behind me, The Legal Tech Ecosystem, which came out at the end of last year, as a means kind of introducing the reader to the world of legal tech in an accessible and non-technical way. And so while I'm still a lawyer, I do spend a fair amount of my time educating and informing others about legal tech, what it is, what it isn't, and its benefits as well as its limitations.
Well, I'm so thrilled to have you here because so much of what we talk about on this podcast is the intersection of technology and legal practice and the business of law. And so it's all super relevant to your, what you talk about all the time. Let's get just a little bit more about like what you're currently doing, like officially speaking anyway. And then and what is a CLM too, if you wouldn't mind.
Oh, absolutely. So I am effectively the general counsel for a company called Malbek. We don't make wine. We make a contract lifecycle management software. And essentially what that means is we create software to help legal departments manage their contracts. And by managing contracts, I mean the entire contracting function, starting with management of documents, drafting, negotiating those documents, redlining them, tracking them, and everything in between. And really the goal of the solution we offer is to help unite the business in terms of bringing all the functions that come into play when looking at a contract through one solution. So we're talking about finance, procurement, legal, sales, all working through one unified platform on every contract. And most importantly, understanding the status of each contract and who last touched it. And everything can be done through the solution. So it's really a seamless way of managing contracts as opposed to sort of the old school way of emailing drafts back and forth and wondering what the latest draft is.
The way law has been practiced at the onset of the internet and digital record keeping is what lawyers were doing.
Right.
So for Malbek then, you said legal departments. So the target market of the company is like in-house teams, like legal teams or legal ops folks. Are those the people that you're talking to?
So the target really are legal departments and legal ops. So, there's a fair amount of interplay between the two. So we really aim for both. It really depends on kind of the size of the function itself.
Okay. And so it's not like there's like a department in a big law firm that's going to necessarily use the CLM product. This is for companies to use maybe in conjunction potentially with outside counsel, or is this primarily just an in-house tool for the company to use?
It's a solution aimed for in-house, but you can use it in conjunction with other tools and in conjunction with outside counsel if you so wish, for sure.
So, and I promise listeners, we're going to get into the good stuff, but I'm curious to know from a CLM perspective, if these tools can be adapted. And I don't know if necessarily it's true of Malbek or I know none of these tools that actually do this, but I'm a fractional GC on a subscription for businesses that will never be large enough to have a full-time in-house legal team. And I've tried to play around with and like demoed a lot of these CLM tools and tried to hack it in a way that like I could use it as fractional GC for multiple small businesses, but none of them are really built for that. And that's not their fault. Like I'm trying to use a tool in the way it wasn't designed. But what do you think about that kind of a thing? Because I see the way that the profession is going. I see small attorneys or solo attorneys being empowered through using legal tech and AI that they can leverage those and not have to do the big law thing. And maybe the fractional GC model will really take off. So I see market opportunity there. I mean, we're still maybe 10, 20 years in advance, depending on how quick things go. But like, do you think these tools can be used and leveraged for something like that? Or is it just, am I off my rocker?
So I think a couple of things. I think potentially they could be used, but I also think that there definitely is a need for tools more attuned to sort of the type of scenario you're talking about. I happen to know some folks who I think are thinking about or potentially working on such tools, but you're absolutely right. I think that there definitely is a need for tools that can better manage sort of that type of scenario because I do think we're going to see more and more of that going forward.
Yeah, there's such a need for CLMs, and I'll tell you, it's tough being just for the outside fractional GC because I'm left to whatever legal practice management or just other tech out there to try to manage all these things for multiple companies, and it's definitely a pain point I have. Though I think there's too few lawyers in that situation that it doesn't make sense investing millions of dollars in building a product specifically. But exactly what CLM does, though, is like what I'm looking for. So just putting that out there into the ether, we'll see what happens. But since you are also yourself general counsel for Malbek, are you using your own tool? Are you eating your own dog food? Do you use your own CLM in your own company?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily call it dog food,
It's
but
just
yes,
it's a it's startup lingo. It's like if does Calendly use Calendly to schedule appointments within Calendly?
yes.
Like
Well,
that's what I mean.
right. Well, to answer your question, absolutely, yes. I do use our own solution and it's fantastic. It certainly saves me boatload of time and frustration and is incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I mean, you might be the first in-house attorney proper we've had on the show, but we've had a lot of legal tech founders on the show, and I always ask them a similar version of their question: Are they using their own tool in their own business? And it's always a good sign when they say yes. So let's get into your experience ever having to bill time before, because you said you're in-house, so you're living the dream, no billable hours. But before you were doing that, did you ever have an experience where you had to bill time?
Yes, I did. I worked for a big law firm in New York as a paralegal, creating e-discovery databases. It was part of sort of my plan to get a little bit of experience before starting law school. And so, yes, I did have unfortunate experience with billing time and using very obtuse and soul draining billing software and hoping and praying that my time reporting would be accurate so I could get paid, which was important to me considering how much I was working.
What did that like? What impact did that have on you?
It led to a lot of frustration, a lot of anger, a lot of rolling my eyes and hoping and praying, even though I'm not religious, that I would just get paid for the work I was doing because I was working a lot of hours, doing a lot of things and dealing with some challenging personalities. And the last thing I wanted to have to worry about was, if I was going to get paid and when.
And I think you're not the only one who's not religious and ends up praying when it comes to billing time, the impact that that has on people. So so then, in light of that experience, and then going to law school, was it always going to be in house for you? Was that just sort of the goal?
Absolutely. Certainly, that work experience did reinforce my view of working in house. And also, when I was in law school, I continued to want to pursue that role because law firms just were not very appealing to me. And perhaps most frustrating about my law school experience was a lot of the focus in many of the courses was on sort of law firm work, like writing briefs and arguing. And that just was not what I was interested in. So I did find there to be a bit of a slant, which was a little frustrating because, my point in going to law school was being prepared to enter the workforce as a lawyer. And I don't think I've been shy about saying that law school tends to fall pretty short of meeting that fairly basic goal.
I think so. I think so. Well, with the section of legal education considering accreditation of all online law schools, maybe we'll actually get some disruption and innovation in the legal education space. So we'll see.
Hopefully, along with people better prepared to teach what students need to know these days.
which I think it brings to an interesting point, which is, now more and more attorneys are getting in trouble with citing to hallucinated cases with AI. And I really see that. And in at least time of recording a recent story, like it was maybe law clerks or law students that were working for a firm. So for me, I mean, the lawyer who signed the pleading is still, or the filing is still responsible ultimately. But I see that as a failure of legal education, right? Like law schools are not teaching AI to law students as it relates to the practice of law. Well, first of all, because they don't know, but they're not seeking the experts to do that kind of a thing. Do you see it as a failing of legal education as well? Or who do you think, where if you look at comparative fault, who's at fault and what percentage?
Well, I think the most fault lies with the attorneys themselves for
Mhm.
simply not being competent enough to double check their work, which you would do no matter what tool you're using. I think part of the fault definitely lies with law schools not preparing lawyers to practice in a tech-enabled world, although certainly generative AI is a relatively new set of tools. So that's kind of how I lay out the blame. And I also would say that, quite frankly, this is not a fault of the tool. The tool did what was asked of it. It just didn't do it very well. And the reason for that is because the tool they used, ChatGPT, was not designed for that type of use case. So, they got what they kind of were setting themselves up for from using these tools. And, I think it's up to any attorney to, be competent enough to double check their work and understand what the right tool is for whatever they're trying to achieve.
So I'm glad we laid the groundwork of what you're doing because you're an in-house attorney who's not billing time at a company that its target market is to other in-house teams that are not billing time. So you don't have the problem of a tool that creates efficiencies, reducing billable time when when the salespeople at Malbek are selling it to in-house teams. But you wrote the book on the legal tech ecosystem. And I got to imagine a lot of these legal tech tools that are out there and the way the ecosystem is set up are things that ultimately will reduce billable time. So I'm curious to know your perspective on this and why we see then so many of these legal tech companies pivot to trying to serve in-house teams. And are the rest of us like what does the profession and society who we serve lose out on when it's too hard to sell legal tech to attorneys because it reduces billable time?
Well, I think there's a couple things I would say. First of all, I think that, the focus and the point of these tools is not necessarily to reduce billable time. It's more about reallocating time. It's about how you spend your time and being more productive with your time. So, when you're working for a law firm, going back to something we were talking about earlier in terms of billing time, you spend a fair amount of time, entering in time and then making sure it's right and all of that. Well, tools can help with that and make it more efficient and make and automate it and therefore freeing up your time to spend on stuff that you actually can bill and bring more revenue to yourself and to your firm. So I think that the whole kind of tension between legal tech and law firms is a little overstated. And it's really not necessarily about sort of taking time away so much as it's giving you back time. And then secondly, I think with respect to selling tech to law firms, I think the challenge there really lies with the fact that law firms are slow to adapt generally and also are, well, in some ways receptive to some tools or not receptive to all tools. And there's just a lot of, I think, personnel that has to be involved who don't all have the requisite level of knowledge to be able to evaluate a potential tool. So I think there's a number of different factors at play there. And I also would say that, even though a lot of tech tools are sold to and aimed at selling to legal departments aren't all an easy sell either for the same reasons in terms of personnel, in terms of, integration into their tech stack and so on. So, I think in general, selling legal tech is itself challenging.
I think, and I'm curious to know your perspective on this, and if you go into this in the book at all. And by the way, link to the book on Amazon in the show notes. I want to know, like, if this current paradigm is different than past ones, because previously with legal tech, is these the attorneys, whether they're in house or they're in private practice or wherever, they have to learn like new jargon, new systems, new everything in this Gen AI world, and this doesn't necessarily apply to all legal tech, but in particular, legal tech that's incorporating some form of Gen AI, it's natural language. So like you're communicating with these things the way that you would communicate with a person. And I wonder if we're seeing easier adoption, especially from the more seasoned attorneys, shall we say, that might even still be using word perfect. Like, are they more likely to adopt these tools because we communicate with them in different ways? I know Jordan Furlong has written about this as well. Like, what's your perspective on that? Did you go into any of that type of like, is the interface a problem with it, with legal tech?
Well, first of all, speaking as someone who's friends with Jordan for long and tends to think pretty highly of what he has to say, I think he tends to be right about these things. And to your point, certainly the accessibility is a factor. And I think the fact that generative AI tools are very accessible certainly has helped with adoption for sure. At the same time, because they are so accessible, I think there's this tendency to want to believe that these tools are just, magical wizards that can do anything that's asked of them. And that's definitely not the case. And I think that makes sense because they're created by humans. Humans are imperfect. And so the tools they create are imperfect as well. And the data that these tools have access to is limited as well. So, I think it's important to, while welcome accessibility and really value that as a factor in adoption, it's also equally important to be aware of the risks and benefits of these tools and understand their limitations and that not all tools are capable of doing the same things.
So when you were putting together the book, is this like what kind of like research did you do? Like, were you playing around with a lot of legal tech, talking to a lot of other legal tech founders? Like what went into like writing the book on the legal tech ecosystem?
Well, it was a 3-year project, and the basis for it really stems from a lot of the interviews I conducted and posted on my website of legal tech leaders, whether they were thought leaders or creators of tools or teachers. And that really informed how I went about writing the book. And the intent with the book really was to provide a high level, accessible, non technical introduction to the world of legal tech and show that it's really more than just about the tech. It's about tech, people, and process all working together, impacting one another, and being interdependent upon one another. And so that's really the key overarching theme of the book. And I think that's important to remember when you're thinking about technology is that it's not about the tech, it's about the tech in conjunction with other things.
Coming back to the use of the tech with lawyers, I know you did mention, and I think it's true for a time. I think there's going to be diminishing returns with this. With technology, will automate things that probably weren't billable time anyway, that lawyers might have been questionably billing for. That might even automatically track billable time. I just saw some of those tools at Tech Show, but I feel like tasks are going to be sped up so quickly that over time it's just not even going to be like you'll have to be billing $25,000 an hour for it to make any sense. So in light of like all the legal tech that's out there, I mean, what's your prediction on the potential demise of the billable hour? Do you think it's going to happen? Have reports of the end of the era of the billable hour been overreported?
I would say that best case scenario is it's gonna die in a slow and painful way. And I think that will be influenced by sort of increased productivity, increased competition from other providers that are able to do more with less and in a tech enabled way. And the fact that, you know, no one really likes billing time. And while it's a financially lucrative model that really requires very little thought or thinking, it is definitely, getting a lot of pressure from the rise of tech and the fact that technology allows for things to be done in a more productive and quicker way. That being said, we've seen how resilient the billable hour model is. So I'm hesitant to provide an exact time of death, but I do think that, as I said before, it's going to be a slow and painful death.
Looking at the legal tech ecosystem, billing models are most prominent for legal tech companies that you've seen.
So subscription models, project-based models tend to be really popular. I've also seen a number of friends who have started their own small law firms using a subscription model, and I've seen that be very successful because it provides predictability. People pay only for what they want, and they also sometimes utilize project-based model billing as well. And I think that's a really smart idea because at the end of the day, lawyers aren't, necessarily magicians doing magic tricks. We're workers like anyone else. So I think that the things we do shouldn't be that difficult to figure out the cost of doing them.
And the pricing model at Malbek, are you also leveraging subscription pricing?
Yes.
I mean, there's a reason. There's a reason so many legal tech companies are using subscription and project-based, right? Which, when you think of that, the term thrown around in the legal profession for alternative fees is value-based billing, right? What's the value of the project, right? We're no longer thinking about units of time being measured. We're thinking
Right.
about
And I
the
think,
outcome.
yeah, and that's the right way to think about it. I mean, I think there is value is really an important metric to measure work that is being done. What is the value of it to you who wants the work done and needs the work done? That's really, I think, an important lens through which to view legal work, as opposed to viewing it through, oh my God, I have to pay this lawyer another couple $100,000 or what have you, because this project just won't end. That's just not really productive, I think, and counterproductive, actually.
When I went solo, I pivoted from mostly litigation to a transactional only practice. I did not have a database of documents to automate. That's why a business and employment legal document database and automation tool like 650 is super useful. I can rely on the quality of the documents in 650's database since they're putting excellent legal minds to work curating and updating their documents and automations over time. When you're not billing by the hour, outsourcing and efficiency matters, and 650 can help you scale your practice to get high quality documents drafted in less time. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at 650.com and when being onboarded to get 10% off. If you're not a business and employment attorney or you have your own documents that you'd prefer to use, then my next sponsor, Gavel, is the automation tool for you. Gavel allows you to build shareable, client-facing workflow and document automations. In other words, Gavel helps you create a legal practice where attorneys can monetize the value they bring clients in productized form and scale via subscriptions and flat fees. Use the code LAWSUBSCRIBED at gavel.io to get 10% off an annual subscription. There's no one right way to automate and scale your practice, but with one or both of my sponsors, 650 and Gavel, you can take your subscription law firm to the next level. Links to both in the show notes. Now back to the show. Yeah, and this doesn't apply, and feel free to say no. We'll take this out of the interview because I didn't clear it with you first. But all the years of you being in-house attorney, you've had to hire outside counsel, I assume.
I have, and I've dealt with outside counsel before. Yep.
So I mean, I'm just assuming they was all billable time, or did they offer you any kind of alternative fees over the years?
It was all billable time, and in many cases they acted like stereotypical law firm lawyers, which was not particularly helpful for me.
So as an in-house counsel, your responsibilities are plentiful, and I'm sure like the most highest value work you could be doing is not evaluating how much time lawyers spent on some project or other, right?
Absolutely not. No, I'm trying to get a million things done, and the last thing I want to be worrying about is, oh God, here comes another big invoice from this lawyer I don't like working with.
And I mean, hypothetical, because it sounds, because you haven't actually done this because it's all been billable time, but hypothetical, if like, how would your CEO or whomever your CFO like it if you knew exactly, even if you ended up paying the same amount of money to the lawyer, but you knew what it was going to be in advance, and maybe you paid that amount every month? Like, do you think that would be, even if you ended up paying the same amount of money, would it be preferable to know what it would be in advance?
Absolutely, because CEOs and CFOs like nothing more than to model sort of financial behavior, and they like predictability. And so knowing in advance would definitely aid in that quite a bit.
The way that we see law firms compete in this market, especially the outside counsel, like being on panels or what have you, is they just lower their rates. Like that's how they compete, right? Or raise the rates and say we're super premium, right? Like that's because that's the only way to distinguish themselves. But it's not. It sounds to me like it's not even about the amount of money being billed. It's simply the unpredictability of that money is maybe of what it's going to ultimately cost is the larger pain point, both pain points. But am I right in that sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I think you are right. And the unfortunate truth of the matter is, especially some of the big law firms, they all kind of want to follow one another in terms of how they're billing. So if one raises rates, another one raises rates. And if another one does one thing, the other one wants to do something. And it's a little ridiculous because I feel like there's not a lot of thought given to that. It's just a matter of trying to keep up with the Joneses, if you will. But I certainly think predictability in terms of billing would be incredibly useful and helpful, and quite frankly, more client centric, which is something that also has been lacking in the practice of law for a while.
I mean, there's a reason why these legal tech companies are not saying, well, you were in our product for 10 hours, yesterday. So your bill because of that is going to be this amount of money. That's not client centric at all, right? I'm going to move on to the next legal tech product if they build that way, right?
Yeah, it's absolutely ridiculous, and it's asinine if you put it in a different context, which is exactly kind of why I think the wire model is just so antithetical to what the legal profession should be about.
Yeah, and I mean, and this, I don't know if this is a good question because it sort of applies across the board because all these law firms are all billing their time. But did that experience ever make you want to just move on from working with a particular law firm and just try to find another one that maybe did things slightly better than the way this other firm was doing their billing?
Certainly, yes, I think that definitely was part of it, and I also think that certainly my experience before law school, so definitely strongly influenced my view of big law and desire not to A, work for one, and B, have work done by one.
I recently crossed a threshold, a milestone, if you will, in my lowercase I, like my micro influencing in the space on LinkedIn, where I had my first troll talking about the subscription model for legal services and how the billable hour is going to end. And this person was just not receptive to anything. And she ultimately said, well, clients like in-house teams, like they like the billable hour because that way they could keep law firms accountable. And so I was like, accountable for what? And they're like, accountable on not spending too much time on things. They're like, so we're not even thinking about the work. We're just talking about time. Like what do you think about that retort of, well, the billable hour, the clients love it because we could keep them, the clients keep us accountable.
I see that as justification of the lawyer guild that exists at that level, and I think that clients don't love it. I think clients just accept it because they've been dealing with it for so long. In terms of holding someone accountable, there's plenty of other ways to hold people accountable, and so frankly, if I had someone like that responding to a LinkedIn post of mine, I wouldn't even bother responding because everyone wants to be a keyboard warrior and they likely wouldn't be trying to start a fight with you if you saw them in person.
Right, right. And you'd think, I mean, I know with like the demise of X in a way, like LinkedIn has become a place for, you know, let's say poop posting. I try to keep this like not get the explicit tag, if you will. But I'm seeing more and more of it. And from a law student no less. It was like somebody who's a law student, but they said their husband was a former big law lawyer. Who knows? It could have been a made up profile. But nevertheless, that's good advice. Like don't even engage. Uh,
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll share a brief anecdote. I remember one time, I think I was posting on Twitter/X, and it was sort of early days for me. And some law student accused me of being bought out by the legal tech industry. And I laughed and said, "Oh, if only that were the case. If only that were the case." It was not the case. And I've had a few similar encounters on LinkedIn, and I just don't bother responding. And sometimes I will in sort of an academic way just because I want to, just debate a little bit. But most of that I don't bother responding because it's not worth my time. And these people clearly are just reactionary people who are just trying to get something out of you, and it's just not worth it responding to these people. Not to mention the fact that, as I said before, you put a keyboard in front of someone and make it anonymous, and they sometimes will go to town.
I'm not sure exactly when this is going to go like live compared to past recordings I already had, but I was just talking with Dr. Megan Ma the other day, and one of the things she talked about, I'm curious to get your perspective on, is this whole, and we touched on this a little bit earlier, but she said so many lawyers are looking to AI as an oracle, and I thought that's what a great concept, right? Like the oracle fallacy. Like we think AI is a source of truth, but it's not. I'm curious to know because I think a lot of lawyers and then there's a lot of pressure on legal tech companies to get it right once it goes to market because lawyers, we have such a high threshold of, I expect perfection, even though nothing is ever perfect, right? Whether it's from associates that get yelled at because they don't know how the right way to categorize the time that they're billing, or the technology, if there's like one failure, like I heard through the grapevine from some early beta testers of Casetext Co-Counsel that there were a lot more features that were really cool and really useful in the early stages that when they rolled it out, their public beta, they took away because of fear of this exact kind of a thing. So are you like what have you seen in that regard? And what could we do as a profession? And what could the legal tech industry do to bring lawyers around to the idea that the AI, the legal tech, it can be directionally correct, and there's still value there, and it can still help you do your job. Like what are we left to do to make those improvements?
Well, I think first of all, we have to get over ourselves and understand that as humans, we're imperfect. So we can't expect perfection out of ourselves and or perfection out of those things that are created by us, meaning humans. That being said, I think we also have to be realistic about the, you know, expectations we put on technologies and understand that they're all gonna be good at some things and be not so great at other things. And there's always room for improvement. And lastly, particularly with respect to generative AI, we're really in the earliest days right now. So I think it's really important to keep in mind that and understand that these capabilities will grow and evolve over time, just as other technologies have as well. I mean, think back to the first computer any of us used, if we even used one. They were clunky and kind of difficult and a little obtuse to use. And now they're incredibly intuitive, and we carry basically a small one in our pocket every day in the form of a phone.
Or in my case, I learned that my very expensive device, because I got the iPhone 15 Pro Max, has a much better camera than my Logitech 4K Brio, and so I started to use that instead. Right? It's like I'm using it for everything. It's a freaking supercomputer. It's amazing, and it's like one of my most expensive things I own. Why not leverage it? So I'm curious to know your thoughts on this. I'll tell you what my prediction is, and I'm not alone in this. Richard Schroemans of Artificial Lawyer has said some version of this, and that is that like AI will, and I do kind of, I have some agreements with this because he also thinks prompt engineering won't be necessary. I think we're still going to have some version of prompt engineering, but I do agree with the idea that AI, like in this whole, like it's, hey, we use AI. It's going to be like even maybe next year, in the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to be like saying we use the internet, or we use the cloud. Like this, like it's going to be table stakes. These tools are going to, this technology is going to be built into all these existing tools, and if it's not, then they're just going to be simply outcompeted by the other tool, whether it's legal tech or other tech. What do you think about that kind of a future? Do you agree, disagree, somewhere
I
between?
certainly think, yeah, I certainly think that generative AI is going to be just part and parcel of our normal practice going forward in any, industry. I think that, in my view, almost goes without saying. In terms of prompt engineering, I tend to share more of Richard Schroman's view in that I'm not sure there's necessarily going to be a need for prompt engineers or to give a whole lot of thought to prompts as these tools evolve. But right now, certainly it can be a bit of a challenge for people, but also I think a bit of a fun challenge because it's intellectually interesting. I think to consider how best to get a tool to do what you want, because you really have to think about what it is that you want to do and how you would go about doing it.
I think that's so well put. I mean, if there's a good clip to share on social media, like boom, like right there. But I think that that's also going to help us if we're thinking about how to do that with the technology, interact with other humans to like actually think about what we need from them and what's a better way to phrase it, because it's not like I am not of the opinion that AI is a self-thinking thing. I think AGI is probably way far off. I think it's more, I agree with the Grammarly CEO's opinion that AI should be called augmented intelligence more so than artificial intelligence, but it mimics humans in such a way. And as someone, a parent of a 3-year-old, I could tell you these little humans are just like large language models trying to figure out what's the next word that comes, that makes the most sense, right? So it is so human-like, and I think it improves our human-to-human interaction when we become really good prompt engineers. So I'm curious, but that's really interesting to hear another perspective on. You think it's going to go away? I don't know. I mean, I'll adapt, whatever happens, right? But it's interesting. I kind of like interfacing with technology that way, but I feel it'll be more. It won't be text based necessarily prompt engineering. It will be communication, like verbal communication based quote prompt engineering, right? I mean, I think so.
Yeah, I think so. I actually think that sort of oral slash audio generative AI is really the next kind of shoot a drop, so to speak. But I think it's hard though, because we all speak in different ways and have different ways of phrasing things. And because of the different computations in terms of how we put words together, that's a lot of data points for an AI model to handle. So I think we're a ways away from that being super great, and certainly a ways away from being able to, talk to a computer and have it do everything we want it to do, as much fun and great as that likely would be.
So as we start to round out the interview here, you did mention earlier that you do know some firms leveraging subscription models and value-based billing. And well, first of all, I'd love an introduction to have them on the show, give them some free marketing. But also, I'm curious to know like your perspective on that and what you've seen that potentially can work or not work. Is there legal tech in the ecosystem out there that could supercharge a subscription law practice or a value-based law practice when the relationship between time and money is completely inversed, where it's the less time I spend on something, the more money I make because I'm able to get another client, build another automation, do another actual high-level legal work as quickly as possible, leveraging these tools. Like, what have you seen out there that you think is working, not working, or some stuff that might be on the horizon to help an alternative fee-based law firm?
Right. Well, I think, there's a lot of different tech tools that I think can really help with small and medium-sized firms because, again, of that inverse relationship between time and money that you mentioned. One of the tools that I know historically has been very focused on the small and medium-sized firm market has been Clio, which is really great at helping combine billing, document management, and matter management all together. And I think that's been, really fun to see, but for a good reason, because those are things that administratively are time consuming, repetitive, but are also standardizable. And so there's really a lot of room to automate and help improve the time spent on those things such that you're not spending as much time on those things and spending more time on those things that actually can bring you money. And, there's a number of legal research tools as well that can really help with that as well. I mean, there's obviously LexisNexis and Westlaw, but there's also, there's Unicore, there's Case Text, there's a lot of different tools out there that can help with creating, with finding cases, drafting briefs. Case Brief is another one, or Clear Brief is another one. There's just a lot of different tools out there. And I think they're, small law firms and medium-sized law firms are really ripe for technology because technology really, again, can help these firms spend less time on those time-consuming, low-value tasks that take time and money away from other things.
I think that's a great point, and it reminds me of another prediction I like to make, which is with these tech tools, the way that they're going, in particular incorporating artificial intelligence, is it's going to be easier than ever. It's already very easy and very cheap compared to how it was just 5 years ago to start a virtual law firm, leverage these tools, not have to bill your time, actually help people or mom and pop shop businesses, and earn a reasonable living as a solo practice attorney. Will this disrupt the big law model? I think it can once the associates wise up that there's another way and they don't like billing their time and they're looking for an escape hatch. And just one more note before I get your feedback on that, your input, your thoughts on that is most of my guests on the show have been women attorneys of color, that big law or the traditional law model hasn't worked for them. And so they found a way out. And why not innovate the business model along the way? So I think we're already seeing early signs of that. I mean, early signs. Some of these attorneys have been doing this for 8 to 12 years. But I think as more attorneys wise up in big law, they're gonna look for that escape hatch and go. What do you think?
I think that's very true. I think that, to be honest, I think big law and the Bill Wire model is in some ways anti-human. It really takes a very harsh toll on, I think, humans and their mental health and and increases stress. And so I certainly think that, there is going to be a generational shift going forward as people realize that there's only one of them and they need to be in control of themselves and attend to their health both mentally as well as physically.
So before I ask you the last question I ask all my guests on the show, any final thoughts on the legal tech ecosystem or the end of the billable hour or the future of the profession?
Well, I think I would be remiss if I did a short little promo for my book. Please check it out on Amazon. It's highly accessible and non-technical. And seriously, if you have any questions about legal tech, please follow me on LinkedIn, follow me on X, and or connect with me either on LinkedIn or through my website, colinslevy.com.
Fantastic. Great. And with that, Colin, is a hot dog a sandwich and why?
Well, the way you phrased that question, it seems like you're leaning towards a certain answer. I would say that a hot dog is a sandwich because the way I look at a sandwich is you got something between a piece of bread, either two slices or one piece of bread. And a hot dog, you got hot dog in bread and you eat it as a sandwich. So, you're not like slicing it up or whatever. So yes, it is a sandwich.
All right. Very confident answer. We don't always get those on this show. So that's great. I love it. Well, Colin, thanks again for coming on the podcast. Law Subscribed.
Thanks so much.
And that's our show. Thanks again to 650 and Gavel for being sponsors. The best way for others to discover this show is for you to share it with somebody you think would find value from it. Follow me on LinkedIn since that's where I'm most active on social media, and click the bell towards the top right of my profile to get notified about all of my posts about this podcast and everything else I think is valuable for you to see. To get in touch, message me on LinkedIn or email kerbis@lawsubscribed.com. All links are in the show notes. Until next time, this is Matthew Kerbis with Law Subscribed.